Hello, everybody, and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, RM, and today we have with us Darth Plato. Darth Plato, how are you today?
I'm good. It's a cold morning where I am, but I'm kicking. I'm well. Thank you for asking, and good morning, everyone.
Well, Darth Plato, it is cold here as well. I am in New York, as you guys know, and it is a cold, I guess maybe it's around 40 degrees. Um, it's raining. It's one of those days where you just want to stay indoors and do absolutely nothing but stay
I
under
just got
like a
muted for
warm.
somehow.
Yes. So today, Darth Plato and I will be reviewing Horatio Hornblower, uh, episode 3, called The Duchess and the Devil. And we're continuing the series of Horatio Hornblower, which is one of my favorites. And Darth Plato has agreed to come along and review it with me for the historical series that I do on the channel. So we're back with Horatio Hornblower. Now, the last time that we were talking about Horatio Hornblower, he had just finished or tried to take his lieutenant's test,
Mm-hmm.
Darth Plato, and
I
right
have the
before he was
book.
about to finish it, there was all sorts of kerfuffle going on. The port that he was at, where he was taking the test, was under attack, and it kind of interrupted things for him. So he was in danger of failing the test miserably, from what they say. But then this strange turn of events where an action was taking place, and this questionable captain that he had to deal with, certainly he had to deal with him again. Now we see that he is still an acting lieutenant, Darth Plato. Horatio, I guess if he's still acting, then that means it's either within the time period that he's supposed to take the test again, what, a year maybe, or 6 months, or maybe they didn't promote him to be that, or they're just waiting for some other reason why he isn't a full lieutenant. But it's important for him to progress and to be promoted in this hierarchy on the ship. Hopefully the hope is for him to become a captain of his own ship one day, right, Dark Plato?
Possibly. That certainly. I certainly expect that to be the case. The
Yes.
um, the location, however, I think is in Gibraltar. That they mentioned that in this episode that attack that we see in the last episode does take place in Gibraltar.
Excellent. That is good to know. And certainly, as we all are aware that this particular series, Horatio, is still very, very young. He's not a mature man or anything like that. He's
With
kind of,
mhm,
getting more accustomed to handling these situations with the crew and with other captains in particular.
Pelou,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pelou, Captain Pelou.
Yes, but he's handling things with other captains along with other officers, and he, is trying to pretty much find his place where he fits in this hierarchy. He doesn't feel like he is necessarily, it's true that he has a commission as an officer, but it doesn't feel like necessarily we already know he didn't start out as young as a lot of the other sailors did, so he has that's a disadvantage to him. However, he seems to have a little bit of more book smarts, which seems to be playing in his favor a lot of the times. Very specific things, being able to do math, be strong in maths, being able to figure out situations on the fly, which it seems
Mhm.
like he has to do. At least we've seen in the last few episodes, he's had to figure out a lot of episodes on the fly, a lot of situations on the fly, more than I think a lot of other soldiers would be able to do, sailors would be able to do. He just seems to have that ability to do that. And now we find out, so he's already been given a command once or twice, not a permanent one, but a temporary one, of a ship. He's had to transport people back and forth, get supplies, do a bunch of different things that you would expect somebody in this position to do. But he's also been someone who unfortunately has had to even duel against another officer. So he's had some experiences. He's getting stuff under his belt, so to speak, these experiences that he is racking up experience points for, but he still is very ignorant of many of the ways politically how things run. So he has to learn all of this. And I think this episode might be one of the introductions of where he gets his feet wet, especially when it comes to maybe a little bit more of a deportment and what can happen. In the previous episode, he did have to transport someone who I guess was an ambassador um, at some point, and he did okay on that one. Now he's involved with an action where he captures this French ship. He's still on the Indefatigable, as you mentioned with Captain Pellew, and once they go ahead and get this ship, it's a good bounty. It's a good catch, and that what usually would happen is that they would take the ship back to I guess a British port, and they can collect or do whatever they want to. But
Prize money.
Horatio,
Prize. It's called prize money.
exactly, and of course, these are it's captain slash privateer. So these you become a privateer in a sense because you're capturing in this other ship and you're going to cash it in. And not only do you get money for the ship, but you also get money for the contents depending upon what's on it. So you can become very wealthy doing this. And of course, it's not a surprise that this would happen when you're at sea. So um, I think it's interesting because Horatio has to sail this French ship. It's called Le Rêve um, to Portsmouth, but there's he's supposed to make sure that nobody takes the ship from him. And he essentially what happens is he gets invited to this event where he has to attend dinner, and we've kind of seen Horatio fumble over himself once or twice when he has to get dressed for that test. How do you think he's going to fare at the dinner with somebody as prestigious, let's say, as one of the aristocrats, honestly, the governor of Gibraltar, Darth Plato? What do you think? How do you think he would be able to handle that realistically? Do you think he has enough experience to handle a formal dinner with a governor?
Honestly, I don't know if he even would have been invited to something like that because of his. I'm not sure what his social status is compared to other officers in the fleet. And Pellew probably would have been invited because he's a Navy captain. He's not just the captain of a ship, but he holds the rank of captain. By the way, there's a difference in the history of the Navy that a captain can be a status and a rank. You don't necessarily have to have the rank of captain to be the captain of a ship. So Hornblower does have some captain experience, even though he doesn't hold the rank of captain. He's just a midshipman acting lieutenant. I don't know if he. I don't know if he would have been if he would have been in a group like that or how he would have done. There was a school for etiquette. You had to go to school for that. They had finishing schools for stuff like that for how you were supposed to behave, what you were supposed to say, and I don't know. I honestly don't know. I will say though that scene was hosted by a man named Hugh Dalrymple, and I'll mention it before someone else does because somebody else will. Hugh Dalrymple is something of a notorious figure in the history of the Napoleonic era because of what's called the Convention of Sintra. He was tapped to be the commander of the British Expeditionary Force going into Spain. His immediate superior was a man named Berard, and his deputy was a man named Arthur Wellesley, who later would become the Duke of Wellington. There was a problem where the French had been engaged in the Battle of Vermeo, and Dalrymple arrived on the scene. Wellesley had already engaged the French and was pushing them back, and Dalrymple ordered a halt and wanted negotiation, where he allowed the French to leave completely unscathed, keeping the treasures that he had looted from the Portuguese, despite the fact that the British and the Portuguese were allies, and that created a significant scandal in London, and Dalrymple was cashiered. So that was in 1808. What we're seeing in this episode is 1797, so that's 10 years away. But Dalrymple is the man who was at the center of that conspiracy, and I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's very helpful information, and it gives us some kind of perspective of what can happen, especially for somebody as high as Sir Hugh Dalrymple, who in this particular case, although I don't know in real life, was the governor of Gibraltar. I don't know if he really was a governor of anywhere.
he was, yeah, he was the governor of Gibraltar at that time.
So, he is a figure that later on has this scandal, as you mentioned, Darth Plato, and it's ironic that as a sailor, he's going to Horatio is going to have to be able to deal with all different types of personalities and situations. Um, so he ends up getting this invitation, and the invitation is actually an ulterior motive because somehow at the dinner he meets a woman known as the Duchess of Wharfdale. And of course, this Duchess is someone that Horatio Hornblower is going to have an interaction with later on, because suddenly he gets orders from his captain saying that the Duchess would like to return back to England, and Horatio has to get her there. He's going to be bringing her safely home to England, which seems easy enough. Um, Pretty, explanatory, pretty easy to do. And certainly Horatio has sailed back and forth a bunch of times. But it's very interesting because unfortunately, Horatio is still on this French ship, the La Rev, so to speak. And while they're supposed to be sailing back to London, more or less England, um, he gets lost, right? Darth Plato?
This is funny because this entire scene is actually based on a real incident, except it happened in Nelson at exactly that same time and place. So apparently, they want you to believe that Hornblower was sailing north towards England at exactly the same time that Nelson was sailing south through that exact same position at that same time through the Spanish fleet in the middle of this dense fog. But yeah, that is the story that Hornblower is in. Unlike Nelson, Hornblower is discovered, but that exact same thing did happen to Nelson. Interesting enough.
Yeah, it is interesting how the author chose to retell the story in as Horatio versus um, the other captain. But um, so here we find not only does Horatio get lost, but he also finds himself confronting the Spanish, and unfortunately, this is bad for him. Um, because I guess the Spanish and at this point, anyway, let's say as of this date, the Spanish and the British are not getting along.
Well, they're at
So
war.
this causes a problem, and because we know at any time the allies shift and they come and go, and especially in this environment. So poor Horatio finds himself in a very bad situation, and as difficult as it was to try and get himself out of it, um, you know, uh, they end up getting boarded. And Horatio has something very important on him. Do you know more details about what he's carrying, Darth Plato?
More detail about what?
About what Horatio, some very important information that Horatio is carrying.
Oh, the dispatches. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like a MacGuffin, honestly. It's they tell you it's really important, like the briefcase from Pulp Fiction. You must get this to England. It's very important, and um, so okay, so he gets on the ship and he's sailing north, and he's captured for God knows how long. We don't know how long he's captured for, and held in captivity. We know that the Battle of Cape St. Vincent happens right after that, because when they sail through the Spanish fleet, that is the fleet that is 27 ships of the line that takes part in what's called the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, which is one of the major actions of that era. And whatever dispatches were that Pellew wanted to send to London, probably look at information, and especially in those days, was really time sensitive. So wars fluid, events change very quickly on a theater, on a front line. So whatever information he was carrying could not have been accurate by the time it got to London. It wouldn't have been any good anyway, especially after that major battle was fought, because after that major battle was fought, the tactical situation had completely changed. Because before that, the British would have disbanded because they were outnumbered 2-1, and they were at risk of they had to do something, or else the Spanish were going to join forces with the French. And the reason why that was bad is because several years earlier, in 1779, the Spanish and the French had joined forces and invaded the English Channel and threatened to invade England. And London wasn't expecting a bold stroke there, because a significant portion of the fleet was deployed along the Atlantic coast with America because of because they were trying to blockade during the American Revolution. And London did not want to face that situation again. This is why you see the Royal Navy being very proactive in their battle against the French and the Spanish, and blockading ports and preventing them linking up. This is why you see the action in the Napoleon series in episode 2, where the British are trying to blockade the French into Toulon. The reason why they're doing that is because they want to be proactive in blockading the ports so that they don't get out in the open and then join forces with another country and then threaten the English Channel. So that's the reason why you see that going on. But that's not what happened here. There was a major action at Cape St. Vincent. The British were victorious. It completely reversed the situation. The Spanish were then after that were on the defensive. So whatever Hornblower was carrying could not have been that important.
Well, what's interesting is that, Horatio finds himself at the dinner, let's say a night or two before he's supposed to escort the Duchess.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear during the dinner that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye, with Horatio kind of having to take the Duchess on, transport her to wherever she needs to go. It seems like something else is brewing from the way that the Duchess is acting and the governor is acting. And, of course, his captain, Pellew, is very matter of fact when he tells him, yeah, you've got to take her to go to England. And, it feels as if something else is going on, not that she just has to go to England. And so I almost feel like she's the excuse for them to go to England and bring the dispatch there. If anybody stops and they can say, well, I'm just escorting, the Duchess somewhere. So she might be the cover for that. But what the interesting thing that happens is right about the time when Horatio is about to be captured, he doesn't do what his captain asked him to do, which was, if you get captured, destroy the dispatches.
Mm-hmm.
He decides to give them to the Duchess, and she hides them on her person rather than destroying them. And, that's a whole nother thing altogether. Now, all of a sudden, he's giving her something that's supposed to be important, let's say, whatever it is. And she has it. She has access to it. She could read this thing at any time. So I think it's very funny that Horatio decides to kind of make himself more vulnerable in this case. And, she's more than willing to take this on, which I think is also very funny, because I don't think I would want to do that. I don't think I'd want to keep that stuff on me at all. I would want to burn that and just not have to deal with it, or I'd read it first and then burn it, of course. But regardless, Darth Plato, why did Horatio disobey orders?
Well, the simple answer is I don't know. But you are asking a good question. It does raise, it does suggest maybe this isn't the best judgment. Look at Hornblower is, he's very bright. He is capable of flash judgment that is tactically sound. He does have that capacity. but at the same time, he's young and immature and not entirely experienced, and he probably figured he made a snap decision. This information is really important. It could change the course of the war, and I don't necessarily want to throw it away. And this gambit might work. He sees it as a gambit that just might work, and he's enough of a gambler to try. He's obviously he's definitely gambling here, and I think it says something about his personality that he's willing to take a chance like that. But yeah, the safer course of action would have been, throw it overboard, burn it. That would have been a safer course of action, which is what he should have done. But the show wants us to see that he's not just another officer. He's capable of thinking for himself and thinking outside the box. And look at this is true in war. That if you act outside the box, one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to fail spectacularly, in which case history will say this man exercised poor judgment and he was a fool, or you'll succeed brilliantly and you're a military genius. If Hannibal had marched to the Alps and gotten his men all killed, this would historians would go, this is one of the great blunders of military history. But because he succeeded as one of the great successes of military history. And this is the same with the situation with Hornblower. If he pulls it off, he's brilliant. But if he if he's caught and the dispatches fall in enemy hands, is you don't.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Darth Plato. And of course, we see, as in many of the episodes for Horatio, 1 minute he's up with it with the Rev, escorting it back to England along with the Duchess and this dispatch, and then the next minute he's down, having been imprisoned by Don Alfredo. And the funniest part of all of this, of course, he gets to the prison. And what does he find but his fellow crewmate and officer? I'm assuming Archie Kennedy was an officer, although I don't know his rank. It just so happens that Archie survived when he was set adrift on purpose by Simpson from that episode in the very beginning. But now he sees Kennedy, and I wasn't expecting to see Kennedy there, so that was quite a surprise to me. But Kennedy isn't quite himself, is he?
Oh no. Um, he apparently has been quite ill, and he's in a state of starving. He's been in there for who knows how long. Yet at the same time, he's miraculously very well shaven. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. It's the man's dying. Well, he looks pretty well kept for a man that's dying.
Mhm. Well, he was originally, and if I remember this, and this may not be exactly what happened or congruous with the book, but he's actually in a dinghy or a whatever you want to call it. It looked like a dinghy or some small boat, and someone unties the rope. As I mentioned, it was obviously
Yeah, Simpson.
Simpson
Yeah.
from before, and he's set adrift on the ocean, and that must be one of the most terrifying experiences a person can have, is to be set adrift on a dinghy by yourself and you're
Yeah.
unconscious, to wake up.
Yeah, that was in the first episode, just so that anyone watching is confused what we're talking about. This was a character that was originally introduced in the first episode, and he fell ill during while they were on the rowboat, and the rowboat was cut adrift. Yeah, and the character
Yes.
disappeared, and we don't know what happened to him, which is weird because he wasn't mentioned at all in the second episode.
And so the idea that Kennedy has suddenly appeared, what might feel like out of nowhere, because the ocean is a huge place, and for him to kind of pop up in this prison, and I don't even know the period of time. I don't know whether it's been a month. I don't know whether it's been a year, Darth Plato, but it's been a
Oh,
while.
it's been years. It had to have been because in the first episode it takes place in 1793. We know that because they specifically mentioned the guillotining of Louis XVI, and that's in March of 1793. And what we're seeing now is 1797, and we know that because the Spanish the governor, the man who's overseeing the prison, makes reference to the fact that a major action had taken place at St. Vincent. And then that's 1797. So Kennedy's probably been there for the better part of 4 years.
Now, I think that would break anybody mentally, but it didn't break him enough to a point where he managed to spill the beans about Lady Wardale. I can't remember her name. About Lady, how do you say her last name? Wharfdale. Kennedy manages to spill the beans about her, or someone in the group manages to say, hey, you know something? I
Who
know
was
who
Kennedy?
this woman is. I've seen her on the stage. She's an actress.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure that she's, and to make matters worse, Darth Plato, she's not in prison like the other gentlemen, is she?
No, no, no. No, 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 I wouldn't expect her to be, especially if she's calling herself a duchess.
Yes, and so that also leads us to understand, at least at that time period, that being captured and being a member of the nobility, that your treatment will be very different from other people. And we see this.
Look
She's
at,
essentially. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say something, but I didn't want to. I didn't mean to jump in. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead and tell me what you're going to say.
Look, it's just that in that time period, men had very set ideas about how you treat the fair sex, and the men and women are not the same. You don't treat them the same way. You have this boat of captives. You lock the men up because that's what you do, and the women you treat them a little differently. Nobility does come into play, yes, but the fact that she's a lady doesn't mean she's going to be treated differently. You see this. You see this also in Game of Thrones, for instance, when what was it, the first or second season? And I don't remember, where Arya's with that group and they're captured and taken to Harrenhal, and because they think, remember, she's disguised as a boy. She's not. Oh, she's not. They don't know she's a girl. And the captives are the same way. The captors are the same way. And then Lord Tywin walks in and he goes, "Why is she there? Like, who? That's not a boy. That's a girl." And he takes Arya into his into the building. Why? Because you don't put boys and girls in the same place. That's just the way people were in those days, and I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, that's a good point, Darth Plato. And so that not only is there different treatment for the nobility, but there's also different treatment for the sexes. And thank goodness for that, because what it means a number of things. That although the soldiers now know, excuse me, the naval sailors know that she is an actress and isn't who she purports to be, it also means, and Horatio knows this because he gave her the dispatch, that there's a chance that she may still have this thing. But according to Horatio's point of view, and according to the sailors are very resentful towards Horatio, because he also seems to be getting some kind of special treatment, Darth Plato. Um, how does that help morale with this crew?
I don't think that's special treatment. I think that's forced drama. Honestly, I think the problem with him is I think it's psychological. Look, some people just they can't sit still. Maybe he's just stir crazy. But like, prisoners have an obligation to try to escape, I think. And the problem with that is you have a gentleman's agreement, and you see that reference a number of times in this episode. And that was like, this is something that really strikes modern people as bizarre, but there was such a thing as the notion of a gentleman, and you make agreements like you saw on the ship where you hand over your sword, which was a formal thing. When you give your word, like, I give my word as a gentleman. It was something that really was something that was really important in the days. If you went against that, you could be hanged. And well, we'll talk about that in a little while. But it's for shoot, what was his name? The man causing trouble. I guess the devil. The guy, the devil. I guess is. I think he was just stir crazy. He just had it, and I can't just sit here anymore. And he's just lashing out. I think he overturned the bowl of fruit and he steps on the fruit. Why? It's perfectly good food, you idiot. Take the food and eat it. If you don't eat, you're going to get weak. If you get weak, and you're less likely to escape. It's such a silly outburst.
Yeah, it is. And we see things like this play out in the story over and over again. It's completely out of Horatio's control, but somehow the crew don't appreciate what's going on, and we do see that in the story. It's presented to us as if it is an issue for them, for the crew. Kind of like this is the last straw. We're out here suffering. You're being treated to dinners with the person who's holding us prisoner, and it's not cool. And so, like, the refusal to take the fruit, the refusal to eat properly, all of this stuff that's going on in these settings does create some kind of animosity, according to at least the way the show is presented, between Horatio and pretty much everybody. There isn't anybody who seems to have his back right now. So things are kind of going badly. And Kennedy, who's one of the characters, I couldn't get this picture to show any bigger, but he's also in a bad way.
Mm.
Still, he doesn't seem to be able to lift himself out of this kind of perceived grief, if you will, of despair. And as you said, you felt that he was in this prison for quite some time. It
Mm.
seems to have taken a toll on him to a point where he almost doesn't care about anything anymore. Even seeing Horatio and the crew, which might indicate that there's a chance that he could be released from the prison, he's not excited about the notion of getting out anymore. Darth Plato. Seems like the prison may have broken him mentally. But we also see that the crew is watching Horatio get invited to this dinner. But they're also noticing that Horatio ends up having a few audiences with the Duchess, and they don't like that either. Darth Plato, knowing how things could change from one moment to the next. Do you think Horatio had a fear that if they had an opportunity to escape, that the crew wouldn't stand behind him?
Well, he's in command. There should be an expectation that they're behind him. The situation is really showing that the breakdown of breakdown of decorum, breakdown of discipline. It's I don't I think he's kind of getting a raw deal. So he's being invited to dinner by by the Spanish governor. Okay, I'm not sure why that's such a big deal. I mean, Hornblower is the leader of the men. He's not gonna. Why would he invite them all? He's gonna invite the lady, obviously, because he's a go figure. Um, yeah, I'm not sure why the men are so negative about it. Uh, Obviously, they want to escape, but they have to follow Hornblower's lead. That's the way it is. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is very odd that Horatio finds himself in this situation with a crew, especially since he spent so much time with them, let's say presumably years now at this point. And I feel that he obviously has earned their trust, at least for me. Um, I think he had, or it seemed as if he had earned their trust, but now we're in a situation where they're implying that all of this is unfounded. He really doesn't have their trust. He, wherever he's being held prisoner, the quarters are not great. And now all of a sudden he's confronted with essentially having to be responsible for Kennedy, who he has to be because he was part of the ship. It's like he doesn't stop being part of that crew just because they've now found him and things have changed. And so the Duchess even has this plea with Horatio, where she tells him, well, you know something, it's true. You found out my cover of who I am, but you can trust me. So my question is, Darth Plato, should Horatio trust the Duchess?
I'm not sure he has any choice at this point. I mean, what what else can he do? He kind of has to at this point. Um, Look at when he learns her identity as an actress. She's not a Duchess, she's an actress. Now, why is that a big deal? No, to a modern audience, so what? And people in the acting business in those days, they weren't like celebrities now. Like, there's Tom Cruise, he's a big celebrity, take a picture, get his autograph. In those days, you stayed clear of people like actors and actresses. They were the lower rung of society. You didn't want to be around them, and they weren't on par with like pimps or prostitutes, but they were on a level. They weren't far below that kind of a rung in society. So Hornblower might be reacting kind of like that, like you, like you're an actress. It might be something like that going on. Because in high society, she probably would have gotten that kind of treatment, and that's probably why she's going around calling herself a duchess, because she's more likely to get transport to back to England by calling herself a duchess. She's an actress; she can act like a duchess, so that's what she's doing. Um, because if she says it's a duchess, well, people like that. They were the highest rung of society, the aristocracy. It was a very class order society in those days. This was uh, before the modern notions of equality were really starting to take hold. You do see this in the French Revolution and other parts of Europe, but England was a little slower to adopt this than others. So they were deeply conscious about the people in the aristocracy and people down here. And an actor and an actress definitely would have been down below.
Yeah, and that's kind of important to note as well. But on in a situation like this where they're at sea and where they might not necessarily be in a big town, or they could be, in a different port, you could kind of disguise a bit of your ancestry, if you knew how to do it. And she seems to be able to have this ability to do it. And and I think it's interesting because she does plead with Horatio, letting him know, hey, I know what this looks like, but please don't go ahead and think that I'm on their side. I am British. I am a loyalist, more or less, if you will. And just because we're in this prison doesn't mean that I am on, the Spanish side. I'm still, faithful to the British flag. Sorry. And she pleads with him, and Horatio, is kind of nodding his head. But between what some of the other sailors are telling him, it's difficult. And so another kind of odd thing is when some of the other sailors try to escape and it fails, Horatio ends up kind of like in the hole with Kennedy. Now, I don't know why Kennedy's in that place, but we see Kennedy kind of going through a lot of physical situations. He's not eating. And he also has different, I think, I don't remember whether he had fits or whatever it is. But
Epileptic.
he finds himself in the hole, and of course it's this really uncomfortable position to be in, where he's it's like this cramped space. But um what I also think is very interesting is somehow there's some kind of action between the Almeria, which is the boat that the Duchess was given, or would be taking in order to get to where she needs to go, and the Indefatigable. So apparently the Indefatigable is still around.
Of course.
Plato. Were they following what was going on, or was it just happenstance?
Obviously, it'd have to be happenstance. I don't know how else to explain it. I don't even know if the Indefatigable took part in the action at Cape St. Vincent. I imagine it was, because that was really an all hands deck situation, because they were outnumbered by the Spanish 2-1 as it was. They couldn't spare a ship. That's why I'm a little curious as to why Pellew would send away an experienced officer like Hornblower at that moment, considering what was about to come, considering how events were unfolding. Um, but this is now after the fact, so I don't know what Indefatigable was doing. That there they were off the coast of Spain. I'm not sure how they got that close to the Spanish coast. Uh, Even though the battle had been won, the Spanish were still a threat. So it seems a little convenient for the story that the Indefatigable was right there.
Well, Horatio uses this as a bargaining chip because the Spanish, let's say, captain doesn't want to lose the Spanish officer, whatever his ranking is, doesn't want to lose the ship, the Almeria, and so he agrees to let Horatio go and somehow help the boat out, and they end up rescuing the Duchess. In at the same time, she was on the ship at the time, and Horatio agrees or pledges that they'll return to the prison. And it almost doesn't matter because after Horatio and some of his crew go out to assist the Almeria, he ends up rescuing the Duchess and the captain of the Almeria, and then they end up being picked up by the Indefatigable. So now at this point, it doesn't matter almost because they're on board this British ship again. And when they get on the ship, more or less, Darth Plato, after being rescued by the Indefatigable, the Duchess gives the dispatches to Pellew. Um, and so it's kind of funny because it seems like Horatio would have gotten in trouble for what he did by giving the Duchess these dispatches, but the opposite happens. He ends up getting promoted to lieutenant. Um, honestly, for something that had happened during his trials, as I said, there was this examination for lieutenant episode in the previous thing that we covered where Horatio jumps on this fireboat and steers it away from the Indefatigable. So they felt that that was good enough to give him his lieutenant position. But, you know, in my opinion, I think it's very funny that, uh, you know, it's the Duchess who gives Pellew the dispatches. So he knows that the Duchess had them. Was this the plan all along, Darth Plato?
No, I don't think so. The dispatchers would have been probably would have been useless at this point. So, thanks.
Yeah, and of course, Pellew tells the other shipmates that they don't have to return back to the prison.
All right.
But it is very interesting that they were even considering this, Darth Plato, that they would go back to the prison. The idea of that just seems so shocking
Yeah,
that
let
they
me.
would honor that. Darth Plato, was that anything to be taken seriously?
That's a good question. I'm going to take a chance in how I answer this question. The man who wrote this story, I think, it was back in the 1920s. I think this stuff was written. So he probably was born in the 19th century, the 1800s. I've read books from the 1800s, and I can tell you that the way people thought in those days is a little weird in the sense that they really did believe that victory in war, uh, there was some bearing on your moral character. So that the good men win war and wicked men lose war. The righteous win, the wicked lose. And so they like I read a book by a man named Thaddeus Dodge who wrote a history of Hannibal, and one of the things that he says in his conclusion is that he believes that the Romans were victorious because of, and I quote, the moral character of the Roman soldier, and that they thought like that in those days. That this man was from that era, that could be what we're seeing here in the story. And that is that these men, they don't have to go with Hornblower back to prison. Why in the world would they want to do that? To modern people, I'm not going back there. Are you crazy? You're giving me a choice? Let me think. No. But they do. Why? Because they were men of strong character. And their character is why they were victorious. And I think that's what this might be what we're saying here. I could be misreading this, but I think that's what's going on. But it is true that there was this notion of the gentleman, and Hornblower is doing this because he's a gentleman, and you keep your word. This is a really big deal in those days. You give your word, you keep your word. So I understand Hornblower doing that, but the other men, they're not gentlemen. And in those days, they made a distinction between a gentleman and not a gentleman. When we get into the Sharp series, we'll really see this played out really well about the notion of a man who's a gentleman is treated one way. If you're not a gentleman, you're treated this way. And they're like, hello, sir. Wait, you mean you're not a gentleman? Oh my God. That's right. There really was a thing in those days for that. And these men wouldn't have been expected to be like that. They're just scallywags in a ship. But yeah, I think there may be something to that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because certainly there is something to what's going on here. It's more than just the idea of keeping their word. They felt as if this was the right thing to do, as you said, and I think that they did feel obligated to do that, and so they do actually report back to the prison, and which is just unbelievable to me. And when they do report back, they find that the Spanish government decides to say that they don't have to become prisoners anymore because of the feats that they performed in rescuing the Almeria, which is the other boat in question, the Spanish boat. So it looked like, or at least you get the intention or impression that sometimes taking that chance, offering to help, in this case with Horatio and his crew, who were almost at a point of, it felt like they were might have been at a point of mutiny. I could be reading that wrong, Darth Plato, but it felt like they were at a point of mutiny, feeling that Horatio was a traitor. Now they went from feeling that way towards Horatio to not feeling that way at all and kind of accepting what had happened to them as a consequence of just being sailors. But a lot of
Yeah,
times, a lot of the resentment that the sailors had was also based on the fact that it might be the decisions of command, wasn't it?
yeah, you have to be able to control your men, and we see this in the previous episode with Mr. Bunting. And Mr. Bunting was he was just because of the hunger situation. He was talking with the other men like, look, let's do something about the situation. He's fostering discontent. And you can't allow that. And the officer has to step in. If the officer hears about it, the officer has to step in and deal with it because they're your men. You're responsible for them. Look at that's the way it is in the military, and it's true in those days as well. Is that every man has somebody else that is responsible for them. Your petty officer, your sergeant, it could be a corporal, right? But the officers certainly they were responsible for those below them, and there was always someone else above them who was responsible for them. And we see this in this episode too, except they're in prison. But this is still the same thing. They're still officers and they're still men. They're in captivity, but that doesn't change. They still have to respect the fact that Hornblower is the officer and they have to follow his lead. And Hornblower has to step in and say, can't do that. No discontent. I won't have it. He has to be able to do that, and he clearly fails in this instance because these men nearly get killed. The
Yeah,
Spanish
they
look at
do, and it's actually very scary to see how the men are behaving. The prison does not suit them well, and then I also think seeing Kennedy and knowing what Kennedy has gone through equally is disturbing to the prisoners. I think some of them wondered, why would Kennedy be, why would his boat be let go? It didn't make sense. I think a lot of the crewmen didn't understand what was going on with that other officer, even after there was the duel and Pellew kind of even the score. I think that a lot of the sailors still were not quite understanding, and perhaps even blamed Hornblower for Kennedy's, very bad state. After all, it's not like they could go after him after being set free on a dinghy. You don't know where the person is, but I think that they also resented that too. Even as an officer, Kennedy, I don't know whether they knew Kennedy was an officer, but it seemed like he was getting different treatment from other people. And in regards to this, him finally becoming a lieutenant, which Horatio, I'm sure, was very relieved of finding out that this is the case. Um, Darth Plato, did he deserve the title of lieutenant?
I'd say he earned it. It's a my simple answer. No, he earned it.
Yeah. And so there is such a thing. I mean, it's not exactly a field promotion, but it kind of feels like it might be a field promotion for Horatio um, uh, in his particular case, where um, he has these incredible experiences. Um,
His acting lieutenant is a field promotion. He's
oh, is it?
gazetted. Yeah, he's gazetted to acting lieutenant. What am I looking at? You can't. I'm sorry. The him being acting lieutenant is the gazetting to lieutenant. It's temporary. Uh, the letter he gets is the confirmation that his promotion is permanent.
Okay, because I wasn't quite sure whether if he I've heard of acting, lieutenants and stuff like that before, but I didn't realize that that was, in his particular case, a field promotion, or whether it was something that he had to
Yeah.
do in order to.
That look, we still do that. They were doing that in World War II. They had men who were acting common, who were acting captain, acting commodores. Yeah, uh, you have a glut of officers of a certain rank, and then the war ends, and then you have men being thrown. If if Hornblower had still been an acting lieutenant when the war ended, he might have found himself getting squeezed out of service. That's when the military shrinks down because the war is over and money is siphoned away from the military toward other needs, which means you can no longer support these men in the service, so you start cutting men. That's what happened to these acting up. That's the risk of being an acting officer is you risk getting cut later. When your rank is permanent, you're more likely to exactly that. You stay permanent. The war is over. You still have your job.
Well, it is very interesting to look at these ranks and also to see Horatio, who, as we mentioned before, is late to the game in coming and becoming a naval officer. So he does have to play catch up, if you will, not knowing a lot about just general naval requirements. And so all these other guys have advantages over him when it comes to promotion. But once again, he has this incredible experience in the field. And it comes back to,
Yes, yes, yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes. There's no substitute for Rick Burns.
Absolutely. Absolutely no substitute for this. And of course, we can see the look of disbelief sometimes as Horatio is acting. When I say acting, taking action in difficult situations where no one has really instructed him to do anything, but he's taking the action independently. And the look of shock and awe on the faces of the other um, uh, officers is just a delight to watch. Darth Plato as Horatio goes ahead and takes command. So he's now a lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure he's relieved that he doesn't have to worry and that he doesn't have to become a midshipman again for another 6 months. Um, so there is that.
But
Um,
just to make an observation, since they had they just aired another Star Trek this week, is that I've always thought in the past that when they were building up Next Generation, that the character of Wesley Crusher, acting ensign, that they were trying to turn him into a Hornblower like character.
oh, it's interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's what they were trying to do. So
Yeah.
Hornblower is the more successful version of where that character. It seems like somewhere along the line they didn't do that, and Trek I mean, but I think that's what they were trying to do at one point.
Yeah, they did let the Wesley character kind of go after a certain point, and he had a pretty good run. But I think in the end they kind of abandoned what they were going to do with Wesley
Yeah, I
Crusher.
have to. Yeah, I have to ask Rob about that. He knows Trek better than I do.
Yeah,
I know my Trek.
I will ask him about it for sure and get his opinion about it. So that is very interesting, and it would be great to know if that was the case. But this was a great episode, Darth
Mhm.
Plato. I enjoyed this one a lot. And there were a lot of things that I was not expecting to happen. Darth Plato, thank you for joining me for this review of Horatio Hornblower, season 1, episode 3. The
You want to
devil
talk
and the
about the
Duchess. We're talking about who's the devil. I think the devil was this prison and what it did to the men.
sure.
It just exacerbated the situation, made it even worse for everybody. And of course, Horatio being put in the hole. I don't think he's ever had that happen to him
Yeah.
before. So that must have been terrifying for him to understand what can happen to you as a soldier.
But
He's
just to
as a,
mention the part about the parole, I wanted to mention that before we ended is And we don't do this now. We absolutely do not do this now. I believe it was discontinued during the Civil War, but back in the past 1700s, there was a thing called parole, where you make a gentleman's agreement, where you say, if we let you go, you will not pick up arms against us again for whatever the allotted time period, 6 months, a year, 18 months, whatever the time being, and they put your name and you sign your name to that, and you leave. What you see in the episode where they're standing on the beach during the storm with the Spanish officer, they're making a verbal agreement. It's not being written down, but it's still a verbal agreement. And it's the parole. And in those days, you honored your parole. It was a matter of honor. We touched on this already, but it was considered a grave crime to go against this. If you sign your name to something and you leave, then you turn right around, take up arms, and they caught you a second time, they hanged you. They really did that in those days, and we see this a little bit played out in the second episode of the Napoleon series with the Jaffa massacre, because these men had did exactly that. They agreed to the parole and they turned right around, took up arms against the French again. And you have that terrible situation where they're being forced into this, being forced into this. You want free? There you go. It's going back to Egypt, and they all died. Uh, there was a similar situation in the Last of the Mohicans. The end of the movie there is a similar situation where where they have a violation of the agreement. Um, well, not by the English or the French. It was a third party. And probably not the best example to use, but you get what I'm saying. It was something that they did in those days that people today would find weird. Oh, you promised not to stab us in the back? Oh yeah, I promise. Yeah, right. But in those days, yeah, it really, your word really meant something in those days.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. The idea of what socially was acceptable, um, even for someone who was considered a prisoner or a former prisoner at the time. And so we got to see a lot of this. Of course, we saw it come to its resolution when, Horatio and the crew were kind of told they don't have to worry about it anymore because of their accomplishment of trying to risk their lives to save everybody on the Almeria. But yes, it certainly was very interesting to see that dynamic. And Darth Plato, where can people find you?
I'm a PGS junkie. You can find me in the PGS. You can find me in Positive Fandom. This is
All
where I'll be.
right. Yes, guys, if you need to get in contact with Darth Plato, you can contact Darth Plato right here on Positive Fandom. Of course, you can find me here on Positive Fandom or on the Burn Network as well. Sometimes I do stream with Lorena Creole on her channel and the 1/6 Scale Man Network. So you can find me on all of those channels here on YouTube later today. I am going to be doing a stream on the Burn Network with Russ Whitfield, my co-host of Sunday Brunch. We're going to be looking at the Rocky Cinematic IP on PGS moving image. So please do check that out, guys. And remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please, guys, please be kind. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
I have to play my promo. Forgot.